Welcome back to the Raising Special Kids Quick Connect Facebook Live series. My name is Brittany and I'm super excited to be hosting again. So for those just jumping on our Facebook page, welcome. This is Raising Special Kids, our Quick Connect Facebook Live series, and I'm really thrilled to be talking about the subject for today. We get calls about this all the time from families at Raising Special Kids on, how to navigate the state services that exist for our children with disabilities. Before we get to it, happy fall. Welcome back from fall break. I can't believe we're already approaching the holidays, but don't forget that Raising Special Kids does have a full fall calendar of trainings for our families and community. They are virtual, they're at no cost to families, and you can sign up. So we'll make sure we put those links in the comments to check out our fall offerings. And we'd encourage you to reach out to us, of course, at any time if you need assistance. So let's get on to the topic today. It's a common question we get Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 from families on how to navigate the state services that exist in Arizona if you have a child with a disability. So has a physician or a teacher told you needed to apply for something called DDD? Did your child receive a new diagnosis? Are you wondering what exactly all of that means and how to get started? That is what we are going to be discussing today, because admittedly, it can be a little confusing. Every state operates differently, and Arizona has the way that these programs work together, and so some families are really confused. And so thankfully, we're going to clarify on what DDD means, what ALTCS means, and we're going to decipher those acronyms, how they work together, and potential supports and services. So starting off, what is the Division of Developmental Disabilities? And I'm going to say DDD. We really try to avoid acronyms at Raising Special Kids, but that's a mouthful. So DDD is the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So they are our state agency that determines eligibility, coordinates care, and approves services for individuals with certain diagnoses. And there's some criteria that has to be met in addition to the diagnoses we're going to go over in a second. So number one, they must be a resident of the state of Arizona. Number two, the application must be voluntary. And number three, they must be at risk of having a developmental disability up to age 6, or for people over the age of 6 years, have a diagnosis of, now let's tackle those diagnoses that DDD considers. So cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism spectrum disorder, and intellectual or cognitive disability. Now, the evaluations for all of those diagnoses must include a description of how that medical provider, that practitioner, came to the decision regarding that diagnosis. So depending on the diagnosis, there's certain medical providers that DDD will accept that application from and verifying that diagnosis. So for cerebral palsy, it must be, the diagnosis must come from a licensed physician. Same regarding epilepsy, often it's from a neurologist. For autism spectrum disorder, this DDD accepts evaluations from a psychiatrist, a licensed psychologist, a child neurologist, developmental pediatrician, neuropsychiatrist, or pediatricians who have specialized training in autism. So there's a little more practitioners on that list for autism. For intellectual cognitive disability, so this is different as well. So the evaluation report must include standardized testing in regards to IQ and adaptive behaviors testing that leads to the diagnosis of intellectual disability, or if they were evaluated by the school district and they qualify under that special education eligibility category of intellectual disability, DDD will accept that. And you can provide that information to them when you're applying. There is a section of the application, and we'll talk about that in a minute, where you want to fill out that medical records release. That way, when DDD is seeing if your child may be eligible, they can access those records from the type of provider I just mentioned on that list. And, okay, so something that's kind of hard for families. So the diagnosis gets them in the door to apply, but it's not an automatic qualifier. In our state, you must also have at least 3 areas of functional limitation. So to make that simple, 3 areas where their disability significantly affects their life. Some of those areas are, receptive and expressive language, mobility, the capacity to do things independently that are age appropriate, self-direction, could they live on their own someday, learning disabilities. Those are some of the areas that they look at. Also, the disability must be diagnosed prior to the age of 18. And that's something important to remember, because some families are a little confused about that. So they must have one of those diagnoses to apply: autism, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability or epilepsy, and they must have at least 3 areas of functional limitation. And we will go ahead and put in the comments the links to the Division of Developmental Disabilities website, as well as the application that families can download. So that is step 1. So it's a 2-step process, right? So we talked about DDD. The way you apply is you download the application, you can fill it out, print it out, fill it out, and you can email scan it into an email address. It's called ddapply@azdes.gov. That's the address you use. You can also call their customer service at 844-770-9500 to start that application process. Or if you've already applied for your child, you can call them to ask questions or check on the status of their application. In regards to how they figure out eligibility, sometimes DDD does call the parent and ask questions about how their child's disability affects their life. Often the medical records or the reports from the school, if you provided copies of their IEP report, things like that, they're able to determine eligibility from that information. So it really just depends. They may call you, they may not, but if your child is eligible, there's a very important second step that you need to accomplish before that individual will get services. Before I talk about Arizona long-term care, I did want to share something. If your child is under the age of 3, before they can apply to DDD, they also must become eligible for the Arizona Early Intervention Program. Another acronym for you guys, AZIP. So if you were to call DDD today and say, I have a 1-year-old, I think they have epilepsy, they have epilepsy, they may have some disabilities, I want to apply for a DDD. DDD would say you need to call AZIP or early intervention first. Once the child has been approved for AZIP, if they have one of the diagnoses I talked about or they're at risk for that, the service coordinator can help you get in that application to the Division of Developmental Disabilities. If you would like to refer your child to early intervention, you can call Central Referral at 602-635-9799, and we will put that information in the comments as well. So I had to throw that in there. Sometimes it confuses families. So if your family is under 3, AZIP is step 1, DDD is step 2. If your child is over 3, DDD is step 1, and we just went over that. Now let's talk about step 2. So the very important second step that many families actually don't even realize has to happen is your child also must become eligible for something called Arizona Long-Term Care, or ALTCS for short. So Arizona long-term care is under the umbrella of our access, our state Medicaid insurance through the Arizona Health Cost Containment System. So Arizona long-term care is actually just a type of access plan. Now, it's not income-based. It's if your child, when they do the assessments, they have to see if they financially and medically qualify. Now, I said income. I'll talk about a little bit more, but they're looking at your child's income, not yours. And then the medical part, which is what most families want to know about, they're going to ask you, they're going to have someone call you, a pass assessor they call it, and they use this tool to screen and see, does this individual meet the criteria to be qualified for Arizona long-term care. Arizona long-term care provides services to eligible Arizona residents that are aged, blind, disabled, or have a developmental disability. So they pay for anything that DDD approves. So something to remember is, once your child becomes DDD eligible, you're going to be assigned a support coordinator. It's kind of like a case manager, and they're going to meet with you to talk about, potential services and supports your loved one may need. The very important second step they do know about is you have to have an ALTCS application put in. Your support coordinator can help you with that. You can also call Access yourself, and Arizona Long-Term Care yourself, which is, remember, under the umbrella of Access, and start that application. We will put the link in the comments. You can have that information. But however you do it, once that Arizona Long-Term Care application is put in, they will contact you. So it's a 2-part interview. Like I said, there's financial and medical. So when they call you to do the financial interview, they're going to verify your child's income. Your child just can't have more than $2,000 in their name unless you have it in something like a special needs trust or an ABLE account where those funds are protected from affecting their any disability benefits. But just remember, a lot of parents get confused by that. It's based on their income, not yours. After the financial interview happens, they will have a nurse or a social worker to call you to do the pre-admission screening tool, PAS for short, PAS tool. So the PAS process is intended to determine whether or not an individual's current functional And medical condition resulting from a developmental disability indicates a need for services, and this is kind of a hard phrase I don't love, honestly, at an institutional level of care. And as a mom whose child is in DDD and long-term care services, when I first heard institutional level of care, it's alarming to hear it phrased that way. So we know it can be kind of hard to hear, but really what that means is if this individual didn't have their family, they would have to live in a medical home or facility because of their needs are so great with their disability or medical condition. So just remember that. So it's an institutional level of need, but you'll go through this pastoral process, so they'll call you on the phone, and that assessor is going to ask you a ton of questions about how your child's disability affects their life. And it's age appropriate, depending on your child's age. They have several, past assessments, so the assessor knows that, and they'll pick the one that fits your child. And they're going to ask you a bunch of questions on how, their disability affects them, what they have going on medically, all of that. And based on your answers, you accrue points. So you need at least 40 points to qualify for Arizona long-term care. So some tips that we'd like to share for that Arizona long-term care ALTCS for short interview. Remember, if your child doesn't do a proposed activity 100% on their own, or they need full assistance, remember to share that with a past assessor. Some parents don't realize, we want to talk about our child's area of high needs. Of course, be truthful, but share with them, what the hard days are like, what their significant struggles are. Sometimes it helps if you have a physician write a letter of necessity, sharing the need for long-term care services because of their high medical needs. That often can come in handy if you go through any sort of appeal or reapplication process. You can also see if one of the therapists will write a letter that speaks to the goals that they're currently working on and where they're at and why long-term care services would be helpful. And remember to explain to your child's, past assessor that calls you, what your child's diagnosis is and how it affects your child specifically. A lot of our kids have one of the four, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, or cognitive disability, but they also have an overarching genetic diagnosis that no one's ever heard of. That was the case for my daughter. And so when I applied for long-term care, I provided some documentation on what her syndrome was, because at face value, they may not know what that is. So it's really important if your child has some other underlying diagnoses as well, please share that with the past assessor so they can get the complete picture of your child's medical needs. So like I said, they need 40 points to qualify. So if they're qualified for Arizona long-term care, together with being approved for the Division of Developmental Disabilities, so DDD, and Arizona long-term care ALTCS, together they can get many supports and services through the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So when families call in, I like to simplify it. If you think about it, DDD does the care coordination, approval, and eligibility for coordinating services, and long-term care is who pays for it. So they're the Medicaid funding in the form of an insurance plan to provide the funding for those services that DDD approves. So some of the potential services could be, home and community-based services like respite or attendant care or rehabilitation, nursing if your child has high medical needs. As they get older, group employment training, they can help with day treatment services. Sometimes that includes summer camps for that service. The list goes on. Obviously the traditional therapies as well, and then your child will have medical insurance. So to get the most support in our state, if you have a child with a disability through the state services, is to be DDD and ALTCS eligible. So hopefully that clarified the process. DDD is step 1 and Arizona long-term care is step 2. And if your child is under 3, Arizona Early Intervention is step 1, DDD, or the Division of Developmental Disabilities, is step 2, and long-term care is step 3. So we know it's kind of tricky, so we hope that as I broke it out today, it gave some clarification and helped you kind of understand how those programs work together. So something to note, sometimes families call us and say, what, my child qualified for DDD, but they were denied for Arizona long-term care. What should I do? Please reach out to Raising Special Kids. We can talk to you about, reapplying, what that looks like, or even appealing this decision. Sometimes if your child was 35 points out of 40, it's helpful to, talk about it. Request a copy of that past assessment and review the answers and make sure they're accurate and it's what you meant. Often, like I said before, having a physician that knows them best provide a letter of medical necessity for the need for long-term care services can be helpful when you're reapplying or appealing. But please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you about next steps and kind of help you figure out where you're at in the process and how the reapplication process or the appeal process works for DDD or ALTCS. And just something to note too, a child isn't penalized in any way if they reapply. So if I applied for the Division of Developmental Disabilities for my child and they were denied, but I applied again later, the denial doesn't go against them and affect the next application. And that's the same thing for Arizona Long-Term Care. So in closing, hopefully this gave you a quick but helpful overview on how the Division of Developmental Disabilities and Arizona Long-Term Care work together. What the process is like, potential services, how you qualify, and how they determine eligibility. Remember, DDD does the care coordination, eligibility, and approval of services, and Arizona Long-Term Care is the payer. They're the funding source, the insurance, the Medicaid insurance plan for individuals receiving services from DDD. If you have additional questions, if you have a child that just got that diagnosis and your doctor told you to apply for a DDD and you need assistance, please reach out to Raising Special Kids. We help families with this all the time and we'd be happy to support you. Hopefully, everyone's doing well and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.